Hello and welcome to the Pixel Dreams Sleep channel, where we tell stories about myths and monsters to help you drift off to sleep. If you like our channel, please like and subscribe. And now we're off to a place where myths and monsters rule, and sleep comes to those who listen. Close your eyes now, and let yourself drift backward through time. Back beyond the stories you know, beyond the books and films, to a place where words were still taking shape in the mouths of ancient peoples. We begin our journey not in a fantasy realm, but in the mist-shrouded forests of old Europe, where the very word elf was born. The word itself, elf, whisper it softly, comes to us from the early Germanic languages, carried on the breath of peoples who lived close to the land, who saw the world as alive with presence and meaning. In those ancient tongues, they spoke of beings they called albois in Proto-Germanic, which would become elf in Old English, alfer in Old Norse. These were not the slender archers of modern imagination. No, these were something far older, far more mysterious. When those early peoples spoke of elves, they were speaking of spirits, of presences in the natural world that could not quite be seen but could certainly be felt. Minor deities, perhaps. Beings that existed in that liminal space between the divine and the earthly, between the seen and unseen. Imagine, if you will, a world where every grove might harbor such a presence, where every stream might be home to something watching, something aware. Let your breathing slow now, in and out, as we sink deeper into this ancient understanding. These early elves were not the diminutive creatures that would come later in folklore. They were not the tiny beings of Victorian fairy tales. No, in those oldest whispers of Germanic and Norse tradition, elves were powerful. They commanded respect. They inspired awe and, yes, sometimes fear. They were beings intimately connected with the great cycles of life itself. Fertility, the greening of the fields, the ripening of crops, the birth of children and livestock, these fell under their domain. The ancient farmers would make offerings, would speak careful words, hoping to gain favor with these beings who could bless or curse the harvest. And fate, that invisible thread that guides each life. The elves were weavers of fate, knowers of what was to come, holders of wisdom about the shape of things. Picture those long-ago villages, wooden halls with smoke drifting from roof holes, fields carved from dense forest, and always, at the edges, the wild places where humans trod carefully. Those boundaries between the tamed and the untamed, those were the places where elves dwelt. The unseen world pressed close there. Breathe deeply, feel yourself settling more comfortably, as we explore further. Now here is something fascinating. Something that speaks to the complexity of these ancient beliefs. In some traditions, the line between elves and the honored dead grows thin, becomes permeable. Some scholars believe that what people called elves might, in certain contexts, have been their own ancestors, spirits of the departed who remained close to the living, who could still influence the world of flesh and blood. This makes a certain beautiful sense, doesn't it? The dead do not truly leave. They linger in memory, in the land they once walked, in the stories told by firelight. Perhaps they become something other, something that watches from the shadows of the forest, that rustles in the leaves, that appears in dreams with warnings or blessings. Elves as ancestor spirits, land spirits, beings that exist in that space between gods and humans, serving as intermediaries, as messengers, as guardians. Let your mind wander through this idea, your body growing heavier, more relaxed with each breath. The land itself, in these old beliefs, was ensouled. Every hill had its history, every spring its guardian. What we might call elves were, in some sense, the voice of place itself, the personality of a particular grove or mountain or meadow. To live in harmony with the land meant living in harmony with these beings. To disrespect the land was to invite their displeasure. And then, let us turn our attention northward, to the cold lands of the Norse, where the understanding of elves took on a particular structure, a cosmic order that divided these beings into two great kindreds. The Ljosalfar, the light elves, luminous beings, beautiful beyond mortal reckoning, dwelling in the realm called Alfheimr. These were creatures of radiance, associated with the sky, with the sun, with all things bright and elevated. Some sources link them to the gods themselves, place them in the heavens as beings of almost angelic purity. In some tellings, their home is Alfheimr, given as a teething present to Freyr, the god of fertility and prosperity. Imagine that, an entire realm of light-filled beings, a gift to a god. The light elves move through the air like music, like the shimmer of heat on a summer's day. They are, in their essence, the opposite of heavy, earthbound mortality. To encounter one would be, perhaps, to glimpse something of the divine order itself, the structure of beauty that underlies creation. Your eyelids are so heavy now, your breathing so slow and peaceful. And then there are the Daukalfar, the dark elves. Not evil, necessarily, but other, darker, earthbound where the light elves soar. These dwell beneath, in the roots of the world, in the deep places. They are sometimes conflated with the dwarves, those master craftsmen of Norse myth, makers of treasures and weapons for the gods. The dark elves know the secrets of stone and metal, of things that grow in darkness, of the hidden paths beneath the mountains. This division, light and dark, sky and earth, above and below. It creates a cosmology, a way of understanding the unseen forces of the world. And as the centuries rolled on, as Christianity spread across the northern lands, these categories began to shift, to merge with new ideas brought by the new faith. The light elves, so luminous and pure, began to take on qualities of angels in some tellings. Beings of goodness and divine light, servants of heaven. And the dark elves, dwelling in darkness, working with the substances of the deep earth, sometimes became associated with demons or devils, with the infernal rather than the celestial. This was a transformation, a translation of old beliefs into new frameworks. But underneath these later interpretations, the older understanding persisted. In the quiet places, in the countryside far from cities and churches, people still left offerings at certain stones, still avoided disturbing certain groves, still knew in their bones that there were beings older than Christianity, older than the gods themselves perhaps, beings woven into the very fabric of the land. Let yourself sink deeper now, the weight of history settling over you like a blanket. These elves of old were not bound by the limitations we place on fantasy races today. They were not a species, not really. They were more like a category of existence, a way of being that encompassed many types of entities. Some were nearly divine. Some were barely more than ghosts. Some blessed. Some cursed. Some appeared as beautiful beyond measure. Others never showed themselves at all, known only by their effects. The mysteriously dead livestock, the suddenly flourishing field, the child born with unexpected gifts, the traveler who lost their way in a forest they'd known all their life. Power, that's what unified them. Power and otherworldness. These were beings with capabilities beyond the human, with knowledge beyond the mortal span of years, with connections to forces that govern the world in ways that most could barely perceive. As you rest here now, in this moment between waking and sleep, perhaps you can imagine what it was like to live in a world so populated with presence, where you were never truly alone, never quite without witness, where the world watched back when you looked at it, where every action rippled out into a web of relationships that included not just other humans, but the land itself, the spirits, the elves. The first whisper of elvenkind comes to us from this deep past. It tells us that before they were fantasy, they were faith. Before they were entertainment, they were explanation, a way of making sense of fortune and misfortune, of beauty and terror, of all the things that happen in a life that cannot quite be accounted for by the visible, material world alone. Germanic forests, Norse mountains, Anglo-Saxon moors, all of these places once rang with other names for elf, each language adding its own flavor, its own understanding. And from all of these whispers, these ancient ways of knowing, would eventually come the elves we recognize today. Though transformed, sanitized perhaps, made safer for modern consumption. But now you know the deeper truth. You know where they came from. You know what they were before they became what we've made them. Let that knowledge settle into your bones as you settle into rest, knowing that you carry forward an understanding that stretches back millennia, to a time when the word elf was new, and the beings it named were powerful, mysterious, and very, very real to those who spoke it. Rest now. The first whisper has been given. Settle yourself more deeply now. Let your muscles release their tension, as we move from the origins of elves to the question of their nature. What are they, these beings? What do they look like? How do they think? And perhaps most importantly, what are they not? The answer, like so many things in folklore, shifts like mist, changes with the telling, transforms across centuries and miles. If you were to travel back through time, stopping in different eras, in different villages, and ask the people there to describe an elf, you would receive a bewildering array of answers. No single form, no fixed appearance. The elves were, in their essence, protean, shapeshifters not necessarily by intent, but by the nature of oral tradition itself, by the way stories change in the telling. In some tales, elves were tall, impossibly tall, towering and terrible in their beauty. Beings that had to stoop to pass through the doors of human dwellings, though why they would enter such places remains unclear in these stories. Their height marked them as other, as not quite human, as something that belonged to a different scale of existence. Breathe slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth, as we explore these forms. In other accounts, elves were radiant, glowing with an inner light that had nothing to do with fire or sun, but seemed to emanate from their very being. To see one was to be dazzled, to have your vision filled with something too bright, too pure for mortal eyes to comfortably perceive. These radiant beings moved through the world like living stars, like fragments of some celestial realm that had somehow found their way to earth. And then, curiously, there were the ghostly elves, pale and translucent, more suggestion than substance. Beings that flickered at the edge of vision, that could barely be seen even when directly observed. Were they truly there, or were they echoes of something, reflections of a world that existed parallel to ours but rarely touched it? These ghostly forms speak to the elves' liminal nature, their existence in the spaces between. Let your body grow heavier still, sinking into comfort. But perhaps most surprisingly to our modern ears, many early accounts describe elves as small. Not the tiny winged creatures of Victorian fancy, but small nonetheless. Human-sized or smaller, moving through the undergrowth, dwelling in mounds and hills, in spaces that existed somehow beneath or within the visible landscape. These were the elves that would, in later folklore, become more and more diminutive, eventually merging in some traditions with fairies, pixies, and other little folk. So you see, there was no consistency. An elf could be tall or small, radiant or ghostly, beautiful or terrible or simply strange. The word elf was more of a category, a type of being, rather than a specific form. What mattered was not how they looked, but what they were. Creatures of power, of the otherworld, of the spaces humans did not fully control. This fluidity continued for centuries, with each storyteller, each region, each tradition adding its own understanding, its own vision of what an elf might be. But then, something changed. The tide turned. The mist began to settle into a more definite shape. As we move into the later periods of folklore, and especially as we enter the age of Romanticism in the 18th and 19th centuries, a standardization begins to occur. The chaotic multiplicity of elf forms starts to coalesce around certain key features. Writers and artists and collectors of folklore began to impose a kind of order, a consistency that the older tales had never possessed. And what emerged from this process was the elf we recognize today. Beautiful, invariably beautiful, not merely attractive, but possessed of an ethereal, otherworldly beauty that sets them apart from mortals. High cheekbones, perhaps. Flawless skin. Features of perfect proportion and grace. The Romantic era loved beauty, idealized it, and the elves became vessels for that idealization. Ageless, frozen at the peak of youth and vitality, unchanging across the turning years. While humans grow old, their faces lined by time and experience, elves remain as they were. This agelessness became central to their identity, to what separated them from the mortal races. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful, as you drift through these images. And perhaps most iconically, pointed ears. Those distinctive ears that have become the universal sign of elvishness in modern fantasy. But here's a curious thing. Those pointed ears are a relatively recent addition to the elf's appearance. The oldest tales mention nothing of the sort. This feature seems to have emerged from the Romantic period and later fantasy literature and art, becoming so thoroughly associated with elves that now we cannot imagine them without it. The pointed ear serves a symbolic function, of course. It marks the elf as other, as not human, but in a subtle way. Not monstrous. Not frightening. Just different. A small departure from human form that signals a vast departure from human nature. So the Romantic era and the fantasy literature that followed gave us elves with a standard form. Tall, beautiful, ageless humanoids with those telltale pointed ears. And this is the form that would dominate, that would become the template for countless stories, games, and films. Tolkien would refine it further. Dungeons and Dragons would codify it. And now, this standardized elf is what most people imagine when they hear the word. But even as their appearance became fixed, other qualities remained consistent with the older lore. Longevity. Whether truly immortal or simply long-lived beyond human comprehension, elves exist on a different timescale than mortals. A single elf might live for centuries, for millennia. Kingdoms rise and fall. Languages change. The world transforms around them. And still they endure, unchanging or changing so slowly that the difference is imperceptible. Consider what this means for a moment. Let your mind drift into this consideration. If you lived for 1,000 years, what would a human lifetime look like to you? A flicker. A brief candle. You might befriend a human, grow to care for them, and then watch as they age and die, all in what feels to you like a single season. And then their children age and die. And their children's children. And onward, generation after generation, while you remain. This longevity creates an emotional distance, an otherworldliness that goes beyond mere physical differences. Elves, in most traditions, cannot fully engage with human concerns because those concerns are so temporary, so fleeting from their perspective. The urgency that drives human life, the knowledge that our time is short, that we must act now or lose our chance. Elves do not feel this in the same way. They can afford to wait, to watch, to consider matters from angles that span centuries rather than years. This makes them seem wise, perhaps, but also cold, detached, as if they are observing life rather than fully living it. Let yourself sink deeper into rest, your mind quiet and calm, and this brings us to perhaps the most important understanding of what elves are. They are not human. This seems obvious, but the implications run deep. Elves follow their own ethical codes, their own sense of right and wrong. And these codes do not necessarily align with human morality. What a human might call unfair, an elf might see as perfectly just. What a human might call cruel, an elf might see as necessary. What a human might call good, an elf might see as disruptive to a larger pattern. In many traditions, elves value beauty above kindness. They will preserve something beautiful and allow something useful to perish. They appreciate elegance, grace, artistry, and may care little for the pragmatic concerns that dominate human society. A human might cut down a grove of ancient trees to plant crops to feed the hungry. An elf would see this as an abomination, a destruction of beauty and age for the sake of temporary mortal need. Balance. This too is central to elven ethics in many tales. Not the balance of justice, necessarily, but the balance of nature, of magic, of the great cycles and patterns that govern existence. An elf might act in ways that seem arbitrary or even harmful to achieve or maintain this balance. They see the larger picture, the longer view, and individual human suffering may not weigh heavily in their calculations. And destiny, fate, the great pattern of what must be. Elves in many stories have some knowledge of fate, some ability to see the threads of destiny as they weave through time. And once they perceive what must happen, they often feel compelled to help it along, or at least not to interfere, regardless of whether the fated outcome seems good or bad from a human perspective. Your body is completely relaxed now, every muscle soft and loose. This non-human morality makes elves dangerous in a subtle way. They are not evil. They do not usually wish harm on mortals. But they also do not necessarily wish mortals well. They pursue their own goals, follow their own values, exist in their own context. And humans who interact with them must understand that they cannot expect human empathy, human mercy, or human justice. An elf might curse a farmer who cuts down a sacred tree, even if that tree threatened the farmer's home. The elf is not being cruel from its own perspective. It is defending something it values against someone it sees as a transgressor. The farmer's intentions, his family's needs, these do not enter into the calculation. An elf might steal a human child and leave a changeling in its place, not out of malice, but because the child had some quality the elves prized, or because some cosmic balance required it. The grief of the human parents is regrettable perhaps, but not sufficient reason to alter the course of action. This is what elves are: beautiful, ageless, immortal or near immortal, guided by aesthetic and cosmic rather than human ethical principles. They are the other. Not monstrous other, but other nonetheless. Close enough to human to interact with us, to occasionally love us or hate us or help us. But not close enough to truly share our values, our urgencies, our way of being in the world. And this is what elves are not. They are not humans with pointed ears. Not merely pretty people with magic. Not wish-fulfillment versions of ourselves. They are genuinely different, genuinely other, and that otherness is what makes them endlessly fascinating. In the standardization of their appearance, something was perhaps lost from the older, wilder traditions. But in the retention of their otherness, their different timescale, their alien morality, there the older understanding persisted. The elves remained dangerous, remained unknowable, remained truly magical. As you rest here, drifting toward sleep, you can hold both understandings at once. The beautiful, ageless beings with pointed ears that modern fantasy has given us, and beneath that, the older, stranger beings who wore many forms and followed no human law. Both are true. Both are elves. Let that paradox settle gently in your mind, as your consciousness settles gently toward dreams. What elves are, and what they are not, now you know. Now you understand. And with that understanding, you can rest. Breathe deeply now. Let the air fill your lungs and slowly release, as we turn our attention to the relationship between elves and the earth itself. For this connection is not incidental, not decorative. It is essential to understanding what elves truly are. Elves are not merely creatures who happen to live in forests. They are of the forest, of the hills, of the meadows and streams and wild places. They are bound to the land in ways that humans, with our cities and roads and walls, can barely comprehend. Imagine for a moment, let your mind drift into this image, a forest at dawn. Mist rising from the forest floor. Ancient trees standing like pillars holding up the sky. Shafts of early light breaking through the canopy, illuminating floating particles of dust and pollen. The smell of earth and moss and growing things. The sound of a distant stream, of birds waking, of leaves rustling in a breeze you cannot quite feel. This is elf home. This is where they belong. Not in the stone cities of men, with their sharp corners and smoke and noise. Not in the ordered fields where every plant grows in rows, where nature has been tamed and bent to human will. No. Elves dwell in the places that remain themselves. The places that remember what the world was like before humans came with their axes and plows and ambitions. Let your body relax more deeply, sinking, settling. The forest, yes, but especially the old forest. The grove where trees have stood for centuries, their roots deep and tangled, their branches forming a roof that blocks out the sky. These are sacred spaces, and elves are their clergy, their guardians, their living spirit. The hills too, particularly those strange hills that rise unexpectedly from otherwise flat land. Hills that seem placed rather than formed, that have an odd symmetry or shape. In Celtic lands, these were called fairy mounds or hollow hills, and they were known to be entrances to the otherworld, to the realm where elves and their kin dwelled. To disturb such a hill was to court disaster. And meadows, but not the meadows humans create by clearing forest. Rather, the natural meadows that form in breaks in the woodland, fed by springs or streams, carpeted with wildflowers that bloom and fade according to their own calendar. These liminal spaces, these meeting places of forest and open land, of water and earth, these too belong to the elves. Water. We must speak of water. Springs bubbling up from underground sources. Streams winding through the woods. Still pools that reflect the sky. Elves are drawn to water, are associated with it in countless tales. Perhaps because water is itself liminal, existing between solid and air, always moving, always changing, always essential to life. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful, matching the rhythm of a gentle stream. These are the places of elvenkind. And what they have in common is this: they are not fully under human control. They are not domesticated. They exist according to their own nature, their own patterns, their own wild logic. Cities, towns, even villages with their fences and boundaries and human order, these are antithetical to elves. Oh, elves might visit such places, might walk through them at night when humans sleep, might observe from the edges. But they do not dwell there. Cannot, perhaps. The very nature of human settlement, with its imposition of order and structure and control over the landscape, creates a space where elves cannot fully be themselves. This is why, in so many stories, encounters with elves happen at the edges. At the boundary between field and forest. At twilight, the boundary between day and night. At crossroads, the boundary between paths. At the shoreline, the boundary between land and water. Elves exist in the liminal spaces, the places of transition and transformation. And their connection to these places is not merely one of residence. It goes deeper than that. Let your mind drift deeper as well, following this thread down into understanding. In the earliest beliefs, elves were not just connected to the fertility of the land, they were responsible for it. They were the agents through which the earth produced abundance, through which life continued, through which the great cycle of growth and harvest turned. When a farmer planted seeds in the spring, their growth depended on many things. Sun and rain, yes. The quality of the soil. The farmer's skill and effort. But also on the goodwill of the beings who dwelled in the land itself. The elves who lived in the fields and forests, who knew the secrets of growth, who could bless or curse the crops according to their whim or their sense of what was proper. A good harvest was a sign of elven favor. Crops that flourished beyond expectation, fields that yielded bounty year after year without exhausting the soil. These were gifts from the hidden folk, from the elves who tended the land in ways invisible to human eyes. And livestock too. The health of cattle and sheep and horses, this depended on the elves. A cow that gave abundant milk, a flock that thrived and multiplied, these were blessed. But animals that sickened for no apparent reason, that failed to breed, that wandered off and were never found, these were victims of elven displeasure. Even family prosperity, the birth of healthy children, the general good fortune of a household, these could be influenced by the elves. They were woven into every aspect of life, invisible but essential. Your body is so heavy now, so relaxed, as you listen to these ancient truths. And because the elves were so powerful, because they could bring prosperity or ruin, because they were unpredictable and dangerous in their otherness, humans developed rituals to appease them, to maintain peace with these unseen neighbors who shared the land. The Norse had a practice called the alfablot, the elf sacrifice or elf blessing. This was a ritual conducted in late autumn, a private family affair, not a public ceremony. The details are scarce, as these were secret rites, held within the home or at sacred outdoor sites. But we know that offerings were made, food, perhaps drink, valuable things given to the elves in exchange for their continued goodwill. The alfablot was about maintaining relationship, about acknowledging that humans were not the only beings with a claim on the land, not the only ones whose needs mattered. It was an act of humility, really. An admission that for all their cleverness and strength, humans still depended on forces beyond their control, on the favor of beings they could not command. Similar practices existed across Northern and Western Europe, though under different names. Offerings left at certain stones or trees. Portions of meals set aside for the good folk. Careful words spoken before cutting wood or digging a well or building a new structure. Asking permission, promising respect, hoping to avoid offense. Let these images wash over you. Ancient peoples at twilight, leaving gifts at the edge of the forest, whispering into the gathering dark, hoping to be heard. These practices speak to a worldview we have largely lost. A worldview in which the land was alive, was inhabited, was never truly empty even when no humans were present. The elves made the wild places feel less lonely, perhaps. But they also made them more dangerous. You were never quite alone, never quite unwatched, never quite safe from powers that did not share your goals or values. And what did the elves want in exchange for their blessings? Respect, certainly. Recognition. Offerings, yes. But perhaps most of all, they wanted things to stay as they were. They wanted the world to remain as it had been, wild and beautiful and ordered according to nature's patterns rather than human convenience. This brings us to a consistent theme across elvish lore, one that persists even into modern fantasy. Elves oppose change. Or rather, they oppose the kind of rapid, violent change that humans specialize in. Deforestation, mining, draining wetlands, building roads and cities, plowing ancient meadows, damming rivers. All the ways humans reshape the landscape to suit their needs. These are anathema to elvenkind. Your eyelids are so heavy, your mind drifting, as we explore this resistance. In old stories, when a village would expand into the forest, cutting down trees to create new fields, that's when the trouble would start. Livestock would sicken. Children would go missing. Strange lights would be seen at night. Tools would break. Crops would fail despite perfect weather. The elves were pushing back, expressing their displeasure, trying to drive the humans back within their old boundaries. And in modern fantasy, this theme continues. How many stories feature elves fighting against industrial development, against the forces of progress and technology? The elves stand for the old ways, for living in harmony with nature rather than dominating it. They are conservationists, though not in a human sense. They don't want to preserve nature for human use or human appreciation. They want to preserve it for its own sake, because it is right, because it is beautiful, because it is how things should be. Industry, with its smoke and noise and pollution, with its hunger for resources and its indifference to beauty. This is the enemy of elvenkind in many modern tales. And though these are fantasy stories, they echo something very old. The ancient understanding that elves represent the land itself, and that to harm the land is to make an enemy of the elves. Consider what is lost when a forest falls. Not just the trees themselves, but the entire ecosystem they supported. The birds and animals, the insects and fungi, the understory plants that grew in their shade, the streams that were fed by their roots, the quality of the air they cleaned, the soil they protected from erosion. All of this gone, converted into lumber and farmland and profit. From a human perspective, this might be progress. More food for growing populations. More resources for building and trade. More wealth, more security, more control over the environment. But from the perspective of the land itself, from the perspective of the beings who have dwelt in that forest for centuries beyond human counting, this is catastrophe. This is violence. This is destruction of something irreplaceable in favor of something temporary and crude. And the elves remember. They remember what was lost. And in their long lives, spanning centuries, they have watched as humans have consumed more and more, have tamed more and more, have left less and less space for the wild and the strange and the sacred. Let your breathing carry you deeper into rest, into understanding. This is why elves are so often portrayed as melancholy in modern fantasy. They are watching their world disappear. They are the last guardians of something that is passing away. And they know, with their long sight and their knowledge of fate, that they cannot ultimately stop it. They can resist. They can slow the process. They can preserve pockets of wildness. But the tide of human expansion is difficult to turn. And yet they try. Because it is their nature. Because they are bound to the land, and they cannot abandon it even as it changes beyond recognition. They are the voice of the earth itself, crying out against what is being done to it. In this sense, the elves of folklore and fantasy serve as the conscience we sometimes lack. They remind us that the land is not merely a resource to be exploited, that the wild places have value beyond their utility, that there are costs to progress that cannot be measured in gold or grain. When we tell stories about elves defending forests or opposing mining or fighting against industrial sprawl, we are, perhaps, giving voice to the part of ourselves that mourns what we have destroyed in our march toward civilization. The part that remembers wildness. The part that knows something precious has been lost. The elves and the living land, they are inseparable. Where one exists, the other must also exist. And where the land dies, where it is paved over and built upon and stripped of its wildness, there the elves fade as well. They retreat to the remaining wild places, growing fewer and fewer, until perhaps they pass entirely out of the world, leaving only their stories behind. But in those stories, they endure. And perhaps that endurance serves a purpose. Perhaps by remembering the elves, by telling their tales, by understanding their connection to the land, we keep alive the knowledge that we too are part of nature, not separate from it. That we too depend on the health of the earth, on the turning of seasons, on the growth of living things. The elves teach us this, if we listen, if we remember, if we honor the old practices of respect and offering and acknowledgement that we share the world with forces beyond our control. Rest now, let this knowledge settle into you, the understanding of elves and earth, bound together, inseparable, eternal. Let yourself drift now, deeper into rest, as we turn to the moments when human and elf meet. Those encounters at the boundaries, in the liminal spaces, where two very different kinds of beings must somehow navigate each other's presence. These meetings are never simple, never predictable, because the elves, as we have learned, are other. They do not think as humans think, do not value what humans value, do not judge by human standards of right and wrong. And so when a human crosses an elf's path, or when an elf chooses to involve itself in human affairs, anything might happen. Blessing or curse, help or harm, gift or theft. Sometimes all of these at once, in ways that make sense only to the elves themselves. Breathe slowly, in and out, as we explore these dangerous meetings. In some tales, elves are helpers, benefactors of humanity. They appear to those in need, the lost traveler, the sick child, the farmer facing ruin, and they offer aid. An elf might guide someone out of the forest when they have wandered too deep, when night is falling and wolves are near. Might heal a sickness that human medicine cannot touch. Might ensure a good harvest for a family that has treated the land with respect. These helpful elves are real, attested to in countless stories. They reward kindness, respect, and proper behavior. They appreciate beauty and craft and honor. A human who leaves offerings at the right places, who speaks the right words, who shows humility and awareness of the elves' presence, such a human might earn their favor. And elven favor is a powerful thing. Crops that never fail. Livestock that thrives. Children born healthy and beautiful. Protection from natural disasters and human enemies. Good fortune that seems to follow a person or family like a blessing. These are the gifts the elves can bestow. But, and there is always a but with elvenkind, the same beings who can grant such blessings can also curse, can harm, can destroy. Let your muscles relax completely. Feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. The elves are not bound by human morality, remember. What seems to us like a small transgression, stepping on the wrong stone, cutting the wrong tree, speaking carelessly about the fair folk, failing to leave an offering, these can provoke terrible retribution. A man who urinates near an elf mound might find himself struck with a wasting sickness that no doctor can cure. A woman who insults the elves, even in jest, might watch her children sicken and die. A farmer who plows too close to a fairy ring might see his entire harvest rot in the fields, year after year, until he is ruined. The elves do not forgive easily. Do not forget. Do not accept apologies in the way humans do. Once you have offended them, you are marked. And their revenge is often subtle, insidious, difficult to identify or counteract. This duality, helpful and dangerous, blessing and curse, healer and destroyer. This is essential to understanding elves. They are not good or evil in any simple sense. They are powerful and other and ultimately unknowable. Any human who deals with them must understand that they are taking a risk, walking a path that might lead to fortune or ruin, and the difference between the two might be vanishingly small. Now, let us speak of one of the most common ways elves were thought to harm humans. a phenomenon with a name that has echoed through the centuries. Elf shot. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. Picture this, a person waking in the morning with sudden, inexplicable pain. A stabbing sensation in their side, their back, their head. Or perhaps a sickness comes upon them with no warning. Fever, weakness, confusion. They were healthy yesterday. Today they are not. And there is no visible cause. No wound. No reason. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful, even as we speak of these dark things. This was elf shot. The belief that elves could strike from a distance, invisibly, with weapons that left no mark but caused real harm. Some traditions spoke of tiny arrows, smaller than a needle, made of flint or stone, shot from miniature bows by elven hunters. These arrows would pass through clothing and flesh without tearing either, but would lodge inside the body and cause pain, sickness, paralysis. Archaeologists have found these supposed elf arrows, Neolithic flint arrowheads, relics of ancient human cultures, unearthed by plowing or exposed by erosion. To the medieval mind, these could not be human-made. They were too old, too strange. They must be the weapons of the elves, physical proof of the invisible attacks that caused so much suffering. Sudden illnesses, particularly those that struck without warning and resisted treatment, were often attributed to elf shot. A stroke that left someone paralyzed. A stabbing pain in the chest that wouldn't fade. A mysterious fever. A wasting disease. If the doctors and wise women could not cure it, could not even explain it, then perhaps the cause lay in the other world. Perhaps the elves had struck. And animals too could be elf shot. A horse that suddenly went lame for no reason. A cow that stopped giving milk overnight. Livestock that sickened and died despite good care and feeding. The elves, the people reasoned, must have attacked them. Must have shot them with invisible arrows for reasons of their own. Let yourself sink deeper. These old fears cannot touch you here. But here is where the duality becomes most apparent, most strange. The same elves who caused these afflictions could also cure them. The beings who shot the arrows could also remove them, could heal the wounds they had made, could lift the curses they had laid. If you knew the right rituals, the right offerings, the right words, you might persuade the elves to undo their harm. Or you might seek out a cunning person, a healer who knew the old ways, who could negotiate with the elves on your behalf. These healers would perform rituals, would speak to the invisible beings, would bargain and plead and offer gifts until the elves relented and removed their curse. And sometimes it worked. The sick person would recover. The pain would vanish as mysteriously as it had come. And this was taken as proof that the diagnosis had been correct. It was elf shot after all, and the elves had been successfully appeased. This created a strange relationship between humans and elves. The elves were both the source of suffering and the only cure for it. You needed them even as you feared them. You had to maintain relationship with beings who might harm you on a whim, because only they could undo that harm. Now, let us turn to something more intimate, more unsettling. The elves in the bedroom, in the vulnerable hours of night. Your body is so heavy, so relaxed, perfectly safe as you listen. There is a phenomenon that humans have experienced throughout history, across all cultures. You wake in the night, or you seem to wake, but you cannot move. Your body is paralyzed. There is a weight on your chest, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. And sometimes there is a presence in the room with you. A figure, a shape in the darkness, watching, sitting on you. You try to cry out but cannot. Try to move but cannot. The terror is absolute. We know now that this is sleep paralysis, a state where the mind wakes but the body remains in the paralysis of REM sleep. We understand the neurology of it. But for our ancestors, this was proof of visitation. Proof that something other had come in the night. And in many traditions, that something was elvish in nature. The word nightmare itself preserves this belief. The mare part does not refer to a female horse. It comes from old Germanic words for a female spirit or demon who sits on sleepers' chests, causing bad dreams and the sensation of suffocation. In some traditions, This mare was a type of elf or was closely related to elvenkind. The elves, it was believed, could visit humans in the night, could press down upon them as they slept, could cause terrible dreams, could steal breath, could even, in some accounts, have relations with sleeping humans, leaving them exhausted and disturbed come morning. These night elves, these mares, were particularly feared because the bedroom is supposed to be safe, private, a place of rest and vulnerability. But the elves could go anywhere, could pass through walls and doors, could find you even in what should have been sanctuary. Let your breathing carry away any tension. You are safe. This is only history, only story. Protection, then, became essential. If elves could harm, could curse, could shoot invisible arrows and press upon you in the night, then humans needed defenses, needed ways to keep the elves at bay, to mark boundaries they would not cross. And the most powerful of these protections was iron. Cold iron, the metal of tools and weapons and civilization. Iron plows that broke the earth. Iron axes that felled trees. Iron nails that held buildings together. This substance, so useful to humans, so central to their technology and progress, was anathema to elves. The reasons given for this vary. Some say iron is too crude, too earthly for beings of such ethereal nature. Others say it represents human dominance over nature, and the elves recoil from it as a symbol of what they oppose. Still others claim that iron disrupts magic itself, creates a kind of dead zone where supernatural forces cannot operate. Whatever the reason, the belief was nearly universal across Northern and Western European folklore. Elves cannot abide iron, cannot touch it, cannot cross a barrier made of it. And so humans used iron to protect themselves. Picture this: a horseshoe nailed over the doorway, points upward to catch and hold luck, but also to repel elves who might try to enter. An iron nail driven into the bedpost to keep night elves away from sleepers. A knife of cold iron placed under the pillow. Iron scissors hung open in the shape of a cross. Iron tools carried when walking at night, when traveling through the wild places where elves might be encountered. Your eyelids are so heavy, your mind drifting through these images of old protections. Even speaking of iron could offer protection. A woman in labor, particularly vulnerable to elvish interference, might have iron tools placed around her bed, and those attending her would speak of iron, would name it, would invoke its protective power. The word itself had force, created a boundary. This marks a profound divide in the cosmology of folklore. On one side, the wild magic of the elves, ancient, natural, unpredictable, powerful. On the other side, the technology of humans, crafted, controlled, practical, advancing. Iron represents human mastery. Our ability to dig ore from the earth, to smelt and forge it into tools, to reshape the world according to our will. It is, in a sense, the opposite of everything elvish. Where elves are of the wild, iron is of industry. Where elves are of tradition and preservation, iron is of innovation and change. Where elves are of magic, iron is of the material world made subject to human intelligence. The fact that iron repels elves suggests that the two cannot coexist. That as human civilization advances, as we spread our roads and towns and iron tools across the landscape, the elves must retreat, must fade, must withdraw into the remaining wild places until eventually those places are gone and the elves are gone with them. This is a melancholy understanding, but it pervades the folklore. The age of iron is the age of humans, and it is the end of the age of elves. But in the old days, when the elves were still strong, when the wild places were still vast, iron was how humans survived those encounters, how they marked their homes as off-limits, how they traveled safely through dangerous lands, how they slept without fear of things pressing down upon them in the darkness. It was the boundary, the line that said, this far and no further. Beyond this line is human space, governed by human rules, protected by human craft. And the elves, for all their power, for all their magic and mystery and immortality, could not cross that line. Let this understanding settle into you, the delicate balance of those old times, humans and elves sharing a world, each with their own territories and powers, meeting at the edges with gifts and curses, blessings and iron. When humans crossed the elves' path, anything might happen. Help or harm, healing or elf shot, gifts or nightmares. But with respect, with proper ritual, with iron for protection, humans could navigate that dangerous boundary, could live alongside the other, could survive in a world more magical and more perilous than the one we know today. Rest now, knowing these old ways, understanding these old dangers, safe here in the present, where such encounters belong only to story and dream. Close your eyes now, breathe slowly, and let your mind open to a possibility that our ancestors held as truth. That the world you see is not the only world there is. That beside our realm, touching it but separate from it, lie other places. Hidden realms. Kingdoms invisible to ordinary sight. And that the elves dwell there, in their own countries, under their own skies. This is not metaphor. Not poetry. To the people of old, this was geography. Real places, as real as any human kingdom, but existing in a different mode of being. Parallel to our world but not quite within it. Let yourself drift into this understanding, your body relaxing more deeply with each breath. The Norse called one such realm Alfheimr, the home of the elves. It existed, they believed, as one of the 9 worlds held in the branches of Yggdrasil, the great tree that was the axis of all existence. Alfheimr was a realm of light and beauty, where the Ljosalfar, the light elves, dwelt in splendor. But the location of Alfheimr was not fixed in the way human geography is fixed. You could not sail there, could not walk there by any ordinary road. It was elsewhere, sideways from reality, occupying the same space as the mortal world but on a different plane of existence. And yet, there were ways in, doorways, passages, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where a human might step across from one realm to another, perhaps without even meaning to. The Celtic traditions spoke of similar realms. Tir na Nog, the land of youth. Mag Mell, the pleasant plain. Avalon, the Isle of Apples. These were the countries of the Ouse Sea, the fairy folk who were in many ways equivalent to the elves of Germanic tradition. Beautiful realms where time moved differently, where age and death held no sway, where music and feasting and splendor were eternal. And these realms too were hidden. Not across the sea, though some stories placed them on distant islands. Not underground, though many entrances led down into darkness. They were elsewhere, alongside, in the spaces between. Your breathing is so slow, so peaceful, as you imagine these hidden countries. But if these realms were parallel, separate, how did one reach them? Where were the doors? The answer, in countless tales across northern and western Europe, was this: the mounds, the hills, the ancient burial places that dotted the landscape. Picture, if you will, the rolling countryside of Old Ireland, Old England, Old Scandinavia. Green hills rising from the land, covered in grass, sometimes crowned with standing stones or ringed with earthworks. Some of these were natural formations. But many were made by human hands in ages past. Burial mounds for the honored dead, built thousands of years before, their origins forgotten by later peoples. These mounds were hollow. That much was sometimes clear, when they were excavated or when erosion exposed their structure. Chambers within, passages leading inward. And if they were hollow, what dwelt within them? The elves, people said. The fair folk. The mounds were their homes, their palaces, their doorways into the hidden realm. Let your mind drift down, imagining tunnels beneath the earth, passages leading into mystery. To approach such a mound at night, particularly on certain nights of power, Samhain, midsummer, the equinoxes, was to risk crossing over. The mound might open. You might see light spilling out from within, hear music, smell feasting. And if you approached, if you entered, you would find yourself in an elf hall, a place of impossible beauty and danger. These were not crude chambers of earth and stone. Once you passed through the doorway, the mound was revealed as it truly was, a palace, a kingdom, a realm unto itself. Great halls lit by light that came from no torch or candle. Tables laden with food and drink beyond anything the mortal world could offer. Elves in their full splendor, more beautiful than human eyes could comfortably perceive. Music that went straight to the soul, that made you forget everything you had ever known or wanted except to hear it continue forever. But entering such a place was dangerous, because the hidden realms operated by different rules than the mortal world. And chief among these different rules was the nature of time itself. Your body is so heavy now, so relaxed, as we explore this strange distortion. Time, in the elf realms, did not flow as it flows here. It moved slower. Or perhaps it moved differently. Or perhaps it did not move at all. And what we experience as time is a uniquely mortal constraint that the elves have somehow escaped. The stories tell of humans who entered the elf halls for what seemed like a single night. They feasted and danced and listened to the music and spoke with the beautiful beings who hosted them. And then, satiated or homesick or finally released, they returned to the mortal world. Only to discover that years had passed. Decades. Sometimes centuries. Let yourself imagine this horror, stepping back into the world you left last night. Only it is not last night anymore. A man dances with the elves for what feels like a few hours. When he emerges from the mound, his village is gone. The language people speak has changed. Everyone he knew is dead. The world has moved on without him, and he is a relic, a ghost of a past no one remembers. Or perhaps he returns after what he believes was a week, only to find that 7 years have vanished from the mortal timeline. His family thought him dead. His wife has remarried. His children do not recognize him. Or worse, his children are grown, with children of their own, and he has missed their entire lives. The fairy stroke, some called this the elf mark. To be touched by the timelessness of the other world, and then thrust back into the relentless flow of mortal time. It was said to be devastating, maddening. Some who experienced it never recovered, spent the rest of their brief remaining days trying to return to the timeless halls, unable to bear the weight of mortality after tasting immortality. Your breathing carries you deeper into these strange truths. But the distortion worked both ways. Some tales tell of elves visiting the mortal world for what they perceived as moments, only to return to their realm and find ages had passed there instead. Time, at the boundary between worlds, became unreliable, unpredictable, dangerous. This was one of the gravest warnings given about the elf realms. Do not eat their food. Do not accept their hospitality. Do not dance with them, no matter how beautiful the music. Because to do so was to become entangled in their time, to lose your connection to the proper flow of mortal hours and days. You might never find your way back to when you belonged. And even if you did return in proper time, even if by luck or care you avoided the temporal distortion, you would be changed. You would carry the memory of that place, that timeless beauty, and the mortal world would seem pale and crude by comparison. Food would taste like ashes. Music would seem cacophonous and graceless. Human company would bore you. You would be marked. Would spend the rest of your life longing for something you could never quite name, never quite recapture. A homesickness for a place that was never your home. Let these warnings wash over you, understanding the danger even as you rest in safety. The hidden realms, then, were places of ultimate beauty and ultimate danger. They offered everything humans might desire: eternal youth, perfect beauty, endless celebration, freedom from death and suffering. But they demanded everything in return. Your time, your place in your own world, your ability to be satisfied with mortal existence. And the entrances, the entrances were everywhere and nowhere. Yes, the great mounds were known doorways. But in truth, any liminal place might serve. A ring of mushrooms in a meadow. Step inside at the wrong moment and you might find yourself elsewhere. A still pool that reflected the sky too perfectly. A grove where the light fell strangely. A crossroads at midnight. A gap in an old stone wall. The world was riddled with passages. You just had to know where to look. Or rather, you had to hope you never accidentally found one. Your mind drifts now through a landscape of doorways, all leading to beauty and danger. Some humans sought these entrances deliberately. Poets and musicians hoping to learn the secrets of elvish art. Warriors seeking enchanted weapons or training from immortal masters. The desperate seeking cures for mortal ailments. The heartbroken seeking to forget. The ambitious seeking power. Some found what they sought. Most found something else entirely. A few never returned at all, lost forever in the timeless lands, perhaps still dancing, still feasting, unaware that centuries have turned to millennia and the world they knew has crumbled into dust. And the elves, how did they view these mortal visitors? With amusement, perhaps. With curiosity. Mortals were brief and strange and so earnest in their desires. They made interesting playthings, interesting guests, interesting prizes. Some elves delighted in human company, in the novelty of mortal passion and ambition, and the way humans lived so intensely because they lived so briefly. Others saw humans as pests, as intruders in realms they had no right to enter. These elves might torment mortal visitors, might trap them in time loops or enchantments, might send them home broken and mad. And some elves, it was said, fell in love with mortals. Took them as consorts, as companions, tried to keep them in the hidden realms forever. But mortal and immortal love is always tragedy, always loss. Either the mortal must sacrifice their humanity to stay, becoming something other, something timeless and cold. Or they must return to their own world, to age and die while their elvish lover remains forever young, forever mourning. Let your breathing slow even further, your body completely at rest, as we contemplate these hidden places. The hidden realms exist in folklore as a kind of commentary on human existence. They are everything we are not. Timeless where we are temporal. Perfect where we are flawed. Eternal where we are ephemeral. They represent the ultimate escape, the ultimate fantasy. A place where death and aging and sorrow cannot reach. But they also represent ultimate loss. Because to escape into such a place is to abandon everything that makes us human. Our connections to family and community. Our place in the flow of generations. Our participation in change and growth and the great story that unfolds through time. The elves can afford timelessness because they have no mortal connections, no urgency, no need to accomplish things before death comes. But we live in time. We are made of time. And to leave time behind is, in a sense, to cease being fully human. So the hidden realms are beautiful and terrible, alluring and dangerous. They offer everything and demand everything. They are paradise and prison both. And they remain hidden, not because they are far away, but because they are too close. Just beside us. Just beyond a door we almost see. Just through a passage we almost find. The elves are there, in their halls of light and music, in their kingdoms of eternal youth. And perhaps that is for the best. Perhaps we are meant to stay in our own world, our own time, with all its imperfection and brevity. Perhaps mortality, for all its pain, is the better bargain. But still, on certain nights, in certain places, the boundary grows thin. And if you knew where to look, if you were brave or foolish enough, you might find your way through. Might step into Alfheim or Tyr na Nog or one of the nameless kingdoms under the hollow hills. Would you dance there? Would you feast? Would you stay? Or would you remember yourself, remember time, remember home, and turn back before the door closed behind you? Rest now with these questions, knowing that the hidden realms remain hidden, that you are safe here in mortal time, that the doors are closed or you have not found them, that you can dream of those beautiful, dangerous places without danger of losing yourself within them. Let your breath come slowly now, evenly, as we turn to the most intimate encounters between mortal and elf. Not merely meetings at the boundary, not simply transactions of blessing and curse, but something deeper, something that touches the heart. Love, loss, and the terrible thin line between gift and theft. For elves, in their beauty and their otherness, have always drawn human desire, and humans, in their passion and their brevity, have always fascinated elvenkind. And when these two come together, When love blooms across the boundary between worlds, the consequences echo through lifetimes. Settle more deeply into rest as we explore these dangerous entanglements. The stories are old. So old. Tales of human men who encounter elf women in the forest, beside streams, in meadows at twilight. These women are beautiful beyond measure, more beautiful than any mortal could be, with a grace and luminosity that seems to come from within. They sing or dance or simply stand there, and the man is transfixed, caught, lost. And perhaps the elf woman smiles. Perhaps she welcomes his attention. Perhaps she too feels something, curiosity, amusement, or even genuine affection for this brief, passionate creature who looks at her with such longing. They might speak, might spend time together, might, over days or weeks or months, develop something that resembles love, and eventually, they might marry, might bind themselves to each other in the way humans marry, though the elf brings her own conditions, her own terms, her own incomprehensible requirements. Your breathing is so peaceful, so slow, as you listen to these old romances. In some tales, this union brings blessing. The elf wife brings prosperity to her mortal husband. His fields flourish. His livestock thrives. His household prospers in ways that seem touched by magic, because they are. The elf wife knows things about the land, about growth, about the hidden patterns of fortune. And she uses this knowledge for the benefit of her new family. Children might be born of such unions. Half-elven children, beautiful and strange, with gifts that set them apart. Sight that perceives more than mortal eyes can see. Understanding of languages they were never taught. Affinity with animals and growing things. These children walk between worlds, belonging fully to neither, carrying the legacy of their mixed heritage. And for a time it seems that the impossible has happened. That mortal and immortal can build a life together. That love can bridge the gap between worlds. But there are always conditions. Always rules. The elf wife might say, never question where I go on certain nights. Never look in this particular room. Never speak my true name. Never strike me, even in jest. Never spy on me while I bathes. Never let the priest bless our marriage. Never let iron touch me. And the mortal husband agrees. Of course he agrees. Any price seems small for such a wife, such happiness, such prosperity. But time passes. Years accumulate. And humans forget. Or grow careless. Or let curiosity override wisdom. And eventually, inevitably, the husband breaks the taboo, violates the condition, crosses the line he swore never to cross. Let yourself sink deeper, knowing how these stories end. He speaks the forbidden name, or strikes her in anger, or opens the locked door, or questions her too persistently about her origins. And the moment he does, she is gone. Not slowly, not with warning. The elf wife vanishes, returns to her own realm, crosses back over the boundary that she had temporarily bridged. And no pleading, no sorrow, no desperate searching can bring her back. The terms were violated. The marriage is ended. The blessing is withdrawn. And the mortal husband is left with loss. Profound, absolute loss. His prosperity fades. His children, if they remain, carry a sadness they cannot name, a homesickness for a mother they will never see again, for a realm they half remember from dreams. The tragedy is worse for being so preventable. If only he had kept the bargain. If only he had not questioned, had not struck, had not spoken. But humans cannot help themselves. We are curious, volatile, forgetful. We cannot maintain perfect behavior forever. And the elves know this. Perhaps the conditions themselves are tests, ways to mark time until the inevitable failure. Or perhaps the elf wife knew from the beginning that it could not last. That the love was real but temporary. That she was always going to leave, and the broken condition was merely the excuse, the mechanism of departure. Your body is so heavy, so relaxed, as we turn to darker matters still. But not all stories of elves taking mortal lovers are so gentle. Not all begin with courtship and consent. Sometimes the elves simply take what they want, lure what attracts them, steal what they desire. Abduction. This is one of the darkest themes in elf lore. The belief that elves would sometimes steal humans away, particularly the young, the beautiful, the talented. Those who possessed some quality the elves prized. A young woman known for her singing might vanish while walking to the well at twilight. A handsome youth might go into the forest and never return. And the assumption, the terrible knowledge, was that the elves had taken them, had spirited them away to the hidden realms, to serve as entertainers or companions or something else entirely. Sometimes these abductions were presented as seduction. The elf appeared beautiful and kind, offered gifts, made promises, led the human willingly into the otherworld. It was only later, when the enchantment faded or time passed strangely, that the victim realized they had been trapped, that what seemed like love or adventure was actually captivity. Let your breathing carry away tension. These are only stories, only memories of old fears. And children. The stories about children are perhaps the most disturbing of all. Elves, it was believed, would sometimes steal human babies. The motivations varied depending on the tale. Perhaps elf children were rare, and they envied human fertility. Perhaps they wanted servants who would grow up knowing no other life. Perhaps they simply found human children entertaining, or thought them better suited to some elvish purpose than their own kind. The stolen child would be taken at night, spirited away while the parents slept or while the child was left briefly unattended. And in the child's place, the elves would leave something else. A changeling. This might be an elf child, sickly or difficult, left to be raised by unwitting humans. Or it might be an elderly elf, disguised to look like a baby, who would live as an impostor among mortals. Or it might be an enchanted piece of wood, glamored to appear human, which would sicken and die shortly after the exchange, leaving the parents to mourn what they thought was their own child. How would parents know if their child had been replaced? The changeling, they said, would be different, would not thrive, would cry constantly or never cry at all, would seem strange, uncanny, wrong somehow, would have unusual appetites or behaviors, would never quite seem human, though the difference might be subtle, indefinable. And if a family suspected a changeling, the remedies were often harsh. Ways to trick the changeling into revealing itself, or to make it so uncomfortable that the elves would return the true child in exchange. Some of these methods were cruel, even by the standards of the time. And one shudders to think of human children, perhaps simply unusual or disabled, subjected to such treatment because their parents believed them to be fairy impostors. Your mind drifts through these dark tales, understanding the fear that drove them. But sometimes the abducted were eventually returned. Years later, decades later, they would reappear, walking out of the woods one morning as if no time had passed, confused to find the world changed, unable to fully explain where they had been or what had happened to them. These returned ones were often strange, marked by their time in the otherworld. They might have skills they had not possessed before, the ability to heal, to prophesy, to work magic. Or they might be diminished, mentally fragile, unable to readjust to mortal life, forever longing to return to the elves. And they would tell stories when they could be coaxed to speak. Stories of halls under the earth, of endless music and dancing, of beauty and terror intermingled. Stories that confirmed what people had always believed, that the elves were real, that they took humans, that the otherworld existed just beyond the visible world. Now, let us speak of a subtler form of claiming. A way the elves marked humans as their own without need for violent abduction. Breathe deeply, slowly, as we explore this quieter danger. Gifts. The elves offered gifts. A beautiful cloak. A pair of silver shoes. A ring or necklace of unearthly craftsmanship. Clothing woven from materials no human loom could produce, that shimmered with colors that had no name. And these gifts were dangerous, because to accept them, to wear them, was to become bound, marked, changed. The human who wore elvish clothing would find themselves slowly transforming. Not physically, perhaps, though some stories include that. But spiritually, emotionally, they would become less human and more other. Would find themselves thinking thoughts that were not quite their own. Desiring things they had never desired before. Feeling disconnected from their mortal life, their mortal relationships. The clothing was a claim. A mark of ownership. It said, "This human belongs to us now." Is transitioning from their world to ours. Is becoming something between mortal and elf. And once the clothing was worn, it was difficult to remove. The wearer would feel compelled to keep it on, to continue wearing it, even as they noticed the changes it wrought. And eventually, they would disappear. Would walk into the forest or into a mound or simply vanish one morning. Would join the elves fully, having been slowly claimed, slowly transformed, slowly removed from the mortal world. Let yourself relax even more deeply, knowing these old dangers cannot touch you here. The warning in all these tales is clear. Do not accept gifts from elves. Do not eat their food. Do not wear their clothing. Do not take what they offer, no matter how beautiful, how valuable, how tempting. Because nothing from the elves is free. Every gift is a chain. Every kindness is a trap. And yet humans continued to be tempted, continued to accept, continued to fall in love or be abducted or take the beautiful cloak offered by the beautiful stranger. Because the elves offered what humans have always desired, beauty, magic, escape from the ordinary world. And that desire was stronger than wisdom, stronger than warning, stronger than fear. The stories of love between mortal and elf are always tinged with tragedy. Even when they begin with genuine feeling, even when both parties enter willingly, the fundamental incompatibility remains. Mortals age and elves do not. Mortals are bound by time and elves are not. Mortals live in the material world with all its constraints, and elves move between worlds as easily as breathing. The love is real, but it cannot last, cannot end happily. The best that can be hoped for is bittersweet memory, a brief period of joy before the inevitable separation. And the abductions, these speak to deeper fears. Fear of losing children. Fear of being replaced. Fear of invisible forces that could steal away everything you loved while you slept. Fear that what you thought was real might be illusion, that what you thought was yours might already belong to something else. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful, carrying you towards sleep. In some sense, these stories are about boundaries and their violation. The elves, in taking human lovers or abducting human children or claiming humans through gifts, are crossing boundaries, are involving themselves in mortal affairs in ways that inevitably lead to pain and loss. But humans too cross boundaries. We enter the wild places. We seek out the elves. We desire what we should not desire, take what we should not take, agree to terms we cannot keep. We are drawn to the otherworld despite knowing its dangers. We court the elves despite knowing they will bring us sorrow. Perhaps this is another aspect of what elves represent. The dangerous allure of the other, the exotic, the impossible. They are everything we are not, and that otherness is fascinating, magnetic. We want to touch it, to possess it, to merge with it. But such merging is always destructive to one party or the other. Usually to the mortal, who loses their place in the world, their connection to their own kind, their very humanity. The elves, meanwhile, remain essentially unchanged by these encounters. They love, yes. They grieve when the mortal partner ages and dies, or when they must leave their human family. But they endure. They continue. They are the same as they have always been. And perhaps that is the deepest tragedy. That for the elf, the human lover or the stolen child is a brief episode in an endless existence. Remembered, surely. Mourned, perhaps. But not defining. Not transformative. Just another mortal who passed through their long, long life. While for the human, the encounter with elvenkind is everything. The defining experience of a lifetime. The moment when magic became real. The love that could never be replaced. the loss that could never be overcome. Rest now. Let these stories of love and loss settle into your understanding, knowing that they speak to something true about desire and otherness and the unbridgeable gaps that sometimes exist between beings who nonetheless cannot help but reach for each other. The elves offered everything: love, beauty, escape, transformation. But the price was always too high. Was always, in the end, everything you were, everything you had, everything you might have been. And yet, knowing this, would you still be tempted if an elf offered their hand? If beauty beyond measure invited you to dance? If a voice like music asked you to follow into the green wood? Dream on these questions as you drift deeper into rest, knowing that such choices belong to story and to sleep, not to the waking world where you are safe. Rest deeply now, let your body settle completely, as we turn our attention to the culture of elvenkind, to the powers they wield, the arts they practice, the way they shape their world and sometimes ours. For the elves are not merely beings of beauty and danger. They are beings of profound capability, of ancient knowledge, of magic woven into every aspect of their existence. Let your breath come slowly, evenly, as we explore these powers. Magic. This is the essence of elvenkind, the air they breathe, the substance of their being. But elvish magic is not the dramatic sorcery of human wizards in tales. It is subtler than that. More pervasive. More fundamental. Elves work their power through influence rather than force. Through suggestion rather than command. Through the bending of probability rather than the breaking of natural law. Consider luck. That strange quality that makes some people fortunate and others cursed. That determines whether the rain comes when you need it, whether the dice fall in your favor, whether you happen to be in the right place at the right moment. Luck seems random, seems to be mere chance. But the elves, it was believed, could influence it, could cause fortune to smile upon those they favored and turn its face from those who had earned their displeasure. Your eyelids are so heavy, your mind drifting, as these truths settle into you. An elf might bless a household simply by wishing it well, and suddenly crops that had struggled would thrive, business deals would succeed, children would be born healthy. Not through any visible intervention, not through obvious magic. Just through the subtle tilting of probability in that household's favor. Or an elf might curse someone, and everything would start to go wrong. Small things at first, tools breaking, milk souring, minor accidents. But accumulating, compounding, until the cursed person's life became a series of misfortunes that seemed entirely natural but were, in fact, guided by invisible elvish will. This is the nature of elvish magic. It works through the cracks in reality, through the uncertain spaces where chance operates. It does not announce itself. It simply makes what was unlikely become likely, or what was likely become impossible. Illusion, too, is an elvish art. Glamour, they called it in the old stories. The ability to make things appear other than they are. To make the ugly seem beautiful, the worthless seem precious, the dangerous seem safe. An elf could walk among humans appearing as one of them, and only those with the sight would perceive their true nature. An elf could make their dwelling appear as a simple hill when in truth it was a palace of impossible splendor. Could make a piece of wood seem like gold, or gold seem like a piece of wood. Breathe slowly, let yourself sink deeper, as we explore these powers of appearance. And glamour worked on the mind as well as the eye. Elves could cloud memory, could make you forget what you had seen or heard, could plant suggestions that felt like your own thoughts, could make you believe things that were not true, or doubt things that were. This made them dangerous in ways that were hard to defend against. How do you protect yourself from a being who can change what you perceive, what you remember, what you believe? Iron might keep them at bay, but if you did not know you were dealing with an elf, if you thought you were speaking with a fellow human, then you would take no precautions, would be vulnerable to their influence. Healing was another elvish gift. The same beings who could inflict elf shot could also cure it, could mend wounds that would kill a mortal, could cure diseases that baffled human physicians, could restore youth, vigor, health through means that seemed miraculous. But this healing, like all elvish gifts, came with conditions. with prices, with the possibility that what was healed would be changed in the process, marked forever as having been touched by elvish power. And curses, we have spoken of these before, but they bear repeating. Elvish curses were terrible things. Not because they killed quickly, but because they lingered. Because they worked slowly, subtly, destroying joy and fortune bit by bit. Because they could extend across generations, afflicting children and grandchildren for offenses they had not committed, could not even remember. Your body is completely relaxed now, every muscle soft, as you drift through this understanding. To have an elf's favor was a blessing. To have their enmity was a slow death. And the line between the two was often invisible, often crossed without knowing until it was too late. But let us turn now from power to art. For the elves are makers, creators, beings of profound aesthetic sense and skill. Music. Above all other arts, music belongs to elvenkind. The songs of elves were said to be unlike any human music. More beautiful, yes, but also more powerful. More essential. As if elvish music somehow expressed the fundamental harmony of existence itself, the pattern that underlies all things. To hear elves sing was to be transported. The sound would go directly to your soul, bypassing your ears, your rational mind. You would feel it in your bones, in your blood. Would understand things you had never known, feel emotions you had never named. The music would change you, whether you wanted it to or not. Let yourself hear, in your imagination, a voice of impossible beauty, singing in a language you do not know but somehow understand. And elvish songs served purposes beyond mere beauty. They preserved history, carried memory across the centuries. The elves, who lived so long, who witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the changing of landscapes, the evolution of languages, they keep these things in song. An elf might sing a ballad that tells of events 1,000 years past, and every word would be true, every detail preserved exactly as it happened. Because the elf was there, witnessed it, carries the memory in music, passing it down through their community, keeping the past alive in a way human history, with its texts and chronicles, can never quite manage. So elvish music was also elvish history. Was their library, their archive, their connection to all the ages they had lived through. To hear their songs was to hear the world's memory singing. But elvish music was dangerous too, particularly the music that accompanied their dancing. Picture this, let your mind drift into the scene, a clearing in the forest at night. A ring of mushrooms marking the boundary. And within that ring, elves dancing. Moving in patterns that seem random but are actually profoundly ordered, synchronized to music that comes from no visible source, or perhaps from the dancers themselves. Your breathing matches the rhythm, slow, steady, peaceful. A human who stumbled upon such a dance would be enchanted. Literally. The music would call to them, irresistible. Their feet would begin to move. They would step into the circle, would join the dance, unable to stop themselves. And they would dance, and dance, and dance. Hours would pass like minutes. Their muscles would scream, their feet would bleed, their lungs would burn. But they could not stop. The music would not let them. The elves would not let them. They would dance until they collapsed, until they died of exhaustion, or until the elves grew bored and released them. And if released, the dancer would stumble away to find that a night of dancing had been weeks or months in the mortal world. That their life had moved on without them. That they had aged years in what felt like hours. This was elvish entertainment. Elvish power made manifest. The ability to compel, to enchant, to trap mortals in patterns they could not break. Let yourself relax more deeply, knowing you are safe from such enchantments. But not all elvish arts were so dangerous. Some were simply beautiful. Expressions of their aesthetic nature, their love of craft and form. Elvish artisans created objects of surpassing quality. Weapons that never dulled or broke. Jewelry of designs so intricate they seemed to have been grown rather than made. Fabrics woven with threads of starlight or moonbeam, impossible materials worked with impossible skill. These objects were rare, precious, often powerful, enchanted with subtle magics that aided their user or cursed their misuser. A blade forged by elves might be lighter than any mortal weapon, sharper, more responsive to the wielder's intent. A cloak woven by elvish hands might turn aside rain, might make the wearer harder to see, might keep them warm in any weather. But these objects also carried something of their makers with them. To own an elvish artifact was to hold a piece of the otherworld in your hands, was to be connected, however tenuously, to the realm of magic and timelessness. Some humans prized such objects above all other possessions. Others feared them, sensing that they came with obligations, with connections that might prove dangerous. Both were correct. And language. The elves spoke languages that predated human speech. Ancient tongues, some said, that were closer to the original language of creation, the words that named things into being. Your mind drifts through sounds of unknown words, musical, mysterious. Elvish languages were described as musical, as poetic, as more expressive and subtle than human tongues. They could convey nuances that had no equivalent in mortal speech, could speak of concepts and experiences that humans had no words for. And elvish writing, when it existed, was often presented as more art than communication. Beautiful scripts that were as much about visual beauty as about conveying meaning. Letters that seemed to grow and flow like living things, like vines or water, organic and graceful. To hear elves speaking among themselves in their own language was to hear something ancient and powerful. Even if you could not understand the words, you would feel their weight, their significance. Would know you were in the presence of something that existed long before your people, that would endure long after. Some humans learned fragments of elvish speech. Wise women and cunning folk who needed to negotiate with the fair folk. Poets who hoped to capture something of that musical quality in their own verse. Scholars who sought to understand the old powers by studying their words. But fluency was rare. The languages were too complex, too alien in structure. And the elves rarely taught them willingly, guarded them as precious things not meant for mortal mouths. Let your body sink even deeper into rest, into this exploration of elvish culture. And their dwellings. These were wonders in themselves, not built in the way humans build, with cut stone and timber. The elves grew their homes, or shaped them from living nature, or simply revealed them through glamour. A tree might be gently encouraged over decades to grow into the shape of a hall, its branches forming a roof, its trunk hollowing to create rooms, but remaining alive, still drawing sustenance from the earth. Or a cave might be worked and smoothed until it became a palace, its walls carved with designs so fine they seemed to move in lamplight. Or an entire dwelling might exist in a state between solid and not solid, real and illusion, present in the material world but also extending into the other world. You might enter through an ordinary-looking door and find yourself in a space larger than should be possible, lit by no visible source, decorated with materials that have no name. Elvish architecture followed principles of beauty and harmony that were not quite human. Spaces flowed into each other organically. Proportions were subtly wrong in ways that made them feel more right. Nothing was quite symmetrical, yet everything was balanced. It was as if the buildings were alive, or had grown according to natural laws humans could not quite perceive. And within these dwellings, the elves lived their long lives, creating art, singing songs, dancing, feasting, engaging in activities and relationships that stretched across centuries, building culture slowly, carefully, without the urgency that drives human civilization. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful, as you imagine these timeless halls. Elvish culture was fundamentally different from human culture because it operated on a different timescale. What humans must accomplish in decades, elves could take centuries to perfect. A single song might be refined over generations. A single artwork might be the labor of many lifetimes. There was no rush, no deadline, no sense that time was running out. This gave elvish culture a depth and richness that human culture, for all its vitality and innovation, could not match. But it also made it static in some ways. Unchanging. The elves perfected rather than innovated. Preserved rather than experimented. Their culture was ancient and would remain ancient, The same songs sung for millennia, the same patterns followed, the same values upheld. Humans, in their brief lives, changed constantly, invented, adapted, evolved. Human culture was dynamic, chaotic, unpredictable. New ideas emerged every generation. New forms, new expressions, new ways of being. The elves watched this with fascination and sometimes bewilderment. How could mortals live such brief lives and yet accomplish so much? How could they bear to create knowing they would not live to see their creation's full impact? How could they change so rapidly without losing themselves? But for all their differences, both cultures produced beauty. Both created meaning. Both expressed something essential about the nature of consciousness, of existence, of the desire to leave something behind that says, "We were here, we mattered, we made something worth preserving." The elves did this through timelessness and perfection. Humans did it through urgency and innovation. Neither way was wrong. Neither was superior. They were simply different responses to different conditions of existence. Rest now, let this understanding settle into you. The richness of elvish culture, their powers subtle and profound, their arts ancient and perfect, their very existence a counterpoint to human life. Magic and music, glamour and craft, language and dwelling. All of these express what the elves are. Beings of power and beauty, of ancient wisdom and timeless creativity, of culture so old and so refined that it seems almost alien to mortal understanding. And yet, in their songs and their crafts, in their love of beauty and their desire to create, they are not so different from us. Just older, longer lived, closer to magic, farther from death. Different, but not entirely incomprehensible. Other, but not beyond all understanding. Let yourself drift now, deeper into rest, carrying with you this knowledge of elvish power and culture, the music that enchants, the magic that influences, the crafts that endure, all the ways the elves shape their world and sometimes ours. Let yourself settle now into this final journey, breathing slowly, deeply, as we arrive at the end of our exploration. Not the end of elvenkind, for they persist in story and imagination, but the end of something else. The transformation, the fading, the long, gradual process by which beings of power and terror became something gentler, safer, less strange. Close your eyes if they are not already closed, and let us trace this transformation together. There was a time, centuries ago, when to speak of elves was to speak of danger. When farmers left offerings not out of affection but out of fear. When mothers clutched their babies tighter at twilight, knowing that the fair folk might be watching, might be wanting, might be reaching out with invisible hands to steal what was precious. The elves were powerful then, real in a way that mattered. They influenced crops and health, luck and fate. They demanded respect, required propitiation, punished transgressions. They were woven into the fabric of life, inseparable from the land itself, from the cycle of seasons, from the mysteries of birth and death and everything between. To encounter an elf was to brush against something genuinely other. Something that did not care about human comfort or human morality. Something beautiful and terrible, alluring and dangerous, capable of blessing or curse according to its own incomprehensible logic. Your body is so relaxed now, so heavy, as we move through time. But the world was changing. Even as the old stories were being told, even as offerings were still being left at sacred stones and farmers still avoided certain groves, the world was changing. Christianity spread across the lands where elves had dwelt in folk belief. And Christianity brought with it a different cosmology, a different way of understanding the unseen world. There was God and there were angels. There was the devil and there were demons. And there was humanity, caught between these forces, struggling for salvation. Where did the elves fit in this new understanding? Some churchmen said they were demons. Fallen angels who had not quite fallen all the way to hell but remained on earth to tempt and corrupt humanity. This made sense to the church. It explained their powers, their dangers, their otherness. If elves were demonic, then Christians knew how to deal with them. Prayer, holy water, the sign of the cross, the name of Christ. These were protections against all things infernal. But the people resisted this interpretation, at least partially. The elves were not demons. They were something else. Something older. They had been here before Christianity, and they did not fit neatly into the Christian categories of good and evil. So a kind of compromise emerged. The elves were not actively worshipped, that would be heresy. But they were still acknowledged. Still given their due. Christian farmers would cross themselves and also leave offerings. Would pray to God and also speak carefully about the fair folk. The old beliefs and the new faith existed side by side, uneasily, for a long time. Let your breathing carry you forward through the centuries. Slow. Steady. But gradually, inevitably, the elves began to fade. Not all at once. Not everywhere at the same speed. But the tide was turning. As more land was cultivated, as forests were cleared, as the wild places grew smaller and fewer, the elves had less space to inhabit, both literally and metaphorically. The untamed land that was their domain was being tamed. The mystery that was their element was being explained away. Science emerged, bringing new ways of understanding the world. Illness was not elf-shot but disease caused by humors, by miasmas, and eventually by germs and viruses. Sudden misfortune was not elvish curse but random chance, statistical variation. The mysterious could be measured, studied, explained. And as the elves were explained away, they lost their power. Not their power in stories, but their power in belief. Their power to frighten, to command respect, to influence human behavior. The offerings stopped. The rituals ceased. The careful speech about the good neighbors, or the fair folk, fell out of use. People said elf without fear, treated the stories as mere superstition, things their grandparents had believed but that modern people knew better than to credit. Your mind drifts peacefully through this transformation, observing without judgment. And something else happened. Something curious. As the elves lost their power to frighten, as they ceased to be taken seriously as real forces in the world, they became available for reinterpretation, for reinvention, for use in new ways, for new purposes. The Romantic era of the 18th and 19th centuries embraced elves with enthusiasm. But these were not the elves of old folklore. These were softer creatures. More beautiful, less dangerous. More sympathetic, less alien. The Romantics loved the aesthetic of elves, their connection to nature, their otherworldliness, their timeless grace. But they stripped away the fear, the menace, the genuine strangeness. Elves became romantic heroes. Noble and wise. Defenders of nature, yes, but in a way that was admirable rather than threatening. They were sad, perhaps, watching the modern world encroach on the wild places. But they were not vengeful. They did not curse those who cut down their forests. They simply withdrew, gracefully, to wherever it is that such beings go when the world no longer has room for them. This was a domestication, a taming. The elves were being made safe for consumption by audiences who wanted to imagine a world of magic and beauty without the attendant danger and moral ambiguity. And then came modern fantasy literature. Tolkien, above all others, reshaped the elf in the modern imagination. His elves were noble, wise, ancient, powerful. They were heroes. They fought against evil. They had clear moral codes that aligned with human notions of good. They were beautiful and graceful and long-lived, yes, but they were also fundamentally good. Let yourself sink deeper, understanding this transformation. Tolkien's elves were not the elves of folklore. They did not steal children, did not curse farmers who offended them, did not operate by incomprehensible ethics. They were, in many ways, idealized humans. Humans perfected, elevated, made magical, but still recognizably on the side of light, of goodness, of civilization. And this version of elves, noble, heroic, unambiguously good, became the template for countless fantasy novels, games, and films that followed. Dungeons and Dragons codified it. Video games adopted it. Movies portrayed it. And now, When most people hear the word elf, this is what they imagine. Tall, beautiful, pointed-eared warriors and wizards. Dwellers in forests, yes, but defenders of good. Beings who might be arrogant or aloof, but who are ultimately on humanity's side in the great struggles against darkness. This is not wrong, exactly. It is simply different. A new mythology built on the bones of the old. A reinvention that serves different purposes, speaks to different needs, resonates with different audiences. But something was lost in this transformation. The danger, the strangeness, the genuine otherness that made elves more than just pretty humans with magic. Your breathing is so slow, so peaceful, as we contemplate this loss. And then there is perhaps the strangest transformation of all. The Christmas elf. Santa's helpers. Tiny, cheerful beings who wear green and red, who have pointed ears and curled shoes, who work tirelessly to make toys for children. These creatures bear almost no resemblance to the elves of folklore. They are not dangerous, not powerful, not otherworldly. They are whimsical, cute, industrious. They exist to bring joy, to help Santa Claus in his yearly distribution of presents. How did we get from elf-shot and changelings and curses that lasted generations, to this? How did beings that were once feared and propitiated become adorable Christmas helpers? The transformation is so complete that many people do not even realize they are related. The Christmas elf and the folklore elf seem like entirely different species. And in a sense, they are. They serve entirely different functions in human culture. The old elves explained mystery, gave form to fear, personified the dangerous beauty of nature, reminded humans that they were not in control, that there were powers beyond their understanding and management. The Christmas elves entertain, delight children, add to the magic of the holiday season. They are harmless, friendly, entirely non-threatening. They exist in a world of pure whimsy, where the most serious concern is whether all the toys will be ready in time. Let your mind drift through this strange journey, from terror to whimsy. And there are other modern elves too. Elves in video games, in fantasy novels, in role-playing games. Some HEW closer to the Tolkien model. Noble, graceful, powerful. Others are more alien, more strange, recovering some of the otherness that was lost. A few even attempt to return to the roots, to portray elves as genuinely dangerous, genuinely other, beings that do not share human values or concerns. But even these attempts at recovery operate in a different context. Modern audiences know that elves are not real. We read about them, watch them in films, play them in games, but we do not fear them. Do not leave them offerings. Do not structure our behavior around avoiding their displeasure. They have become entertainment, fiction, escapism. No longer forces to be reckoned with, but characters to be enjoyed. Is this loss to be mourned? Or is it simply change, the natural evolution of mythology as culture shifts? Your body is completely at rest, your mind open to these questions. Perhaps both. Perhaps the old elves served their purpose in their time. They were part of a worldview that made sense when humans lived closer to nature, when the wild places were vast and mysterious, when so much of life was unexplainable and controllable only through ritual and propitiation. And perhaps the new elves serve our time. They give us a way to imagine magic in a world we have largely demystified. They let us play with ideas of nature and timelessness and beauty in safe, controlled ways. They entertain us without threatening us. But something of the old power remains, even in the tamed versions. The elves still represent otherness, still embody a connection to nature that most humans have lost, still remind us of something we have given up in our march toward modernity and control. When we tell stories of elves, even sanitized stories, we are reaching back toward something ancient, acknowledging, however unconsciously, that there was a time when the world was more mysterious, when humans were not the unquestioned masters of the earth, when there were beings who commanded respect and fear, who could not be controlled or explained or dismissed. The elves have faded. have been rewritten, have been softened and sanitized and made safe for modern consumption. But they persist. In our stories, in our games, in our imagination. Changed, yes. Diminished, perhaps. But enduring. Let yourself rest in this understanding. The long journey from fear to fantasy. And who knows? Perhaps in some hidden corner of the world, in some wild place not yet fully tamed, the old elves still exist. Still watch. Still work their subtle magics. Still maintain the old ways, indifferent to how humans choose to portray them, how we have domesticated them in our stories. Perhaps they are amused by what we have made of them. Or offended. Or simply unconcerned, continuing their long existence while human culture shifts and changes around them like weather, like seasons, like the brief lives of mayflies. We cannot know. We have lost the ability to perceive them, if we ever had it. Lost the beliefs and practices that might have let us maintain relationship with them. We are modern now. Scientific. Rational. We do not believe in elves. And so they have faded from reality into story. From feared spirits to fantasy icons. From powerful others to entertaining characters. From genuine mysteries to explained-away superstitions. Your breathing carries you deeper into rest, into dreams perhaps, as this long journey ends. But in the stories, they remain. Changed but recognizable. And in telling those stories, we keep alive something important. The memory of a time when the world was wider, stranger, more magical. When humans were not alone, not the only intelligent beings, not the unchallenged rulers of the earth. The elves remind us of this. Even in their diminished, domesticated form, they whisper of something we have lost. Something we perhaps needed to lose to become what we are, but something worth remembering nonetheless. So we tell stories of elves. To our children and to ourselves. Noble elves and Christmas elves and tragic elves and dangerous elves. All versions of something that was once believed to be real, that shaped lives and cultures for thousands of years, that has now passed into the realm of imagination. The elves have faded, but they endure in story. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is how they were always meant to survive the modern world. Not as real beings, but as reminders, as symbols, as doorways in imagination to a time and a way of being that we cannot return to but need not entirely forget. Rest now. Our journey through Elven lore is complete. From their ancient origins in Germanic and Norse tradition, through their nature and their connection to the land, through their encounters with humans and their hidden realms, through love and loss and abduction, through their culture and power, and finally to their transformation in the modern world. All of it has been given to you. All these whispers of elven kind, to carry into your dreams. All of it has been given to you. All these whispers of elven kind, to carry into your dreams. Let yourself drift now into sleep, into rest, knowing that somewhere in story, in imagination, in the deep places of cultural memory, the elves remain. Changed, yes. Faded, perhaps. But not entirely gone. Never entirely gone.